I heard the CEO's voice cut through the conference call like a blade. "Amanda, you're overthinking this. Just sign the documents." I looked at the compliance certification on my screen, the one that claimed our quality control processes met European pharmaceutical standards, and I knew that signature would be a lie. What I didn't know, as I said the word no that would get me fired within the hour, was that 3 years earlier, I had negotiated a single contract clause that would freeze $850 million in corporate expansion overnight and bring that same CEO to his knees within 3 weeks. My name is Amanda Torres, and I spent 11 years as Director of Regulatory Compliance at Meditech Solutions, protecting the company from its own shortcuts. The day they fired me for refusing to commit fraud, they thought they'd removed an obstacle. Instead, they'd activated a clause that made me the only person in the world who could save them. And this time, I wasn't signing anything without rewriting every rule that had failed me. Before I show you how one contract clause can shift the entire balance of power in a billion-dollar company, I need to be honest with you for just a second. If you've ever been fired for doing the right thing, if you've ever watched people celebrate getting rid of you only to realize too late what they'd lost, you're going to feel every moment of this story. What happens next is strategic, it's devastating, and it's deeply satisfying. Hit that subscribe button right now, because you're about to see what happens when preparation meets opportunity, when being underestimated becomes your greatest weapon. Now let's go back to that audit call, to the moment when everything changed. The video conference had started at 8 a.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. in Geneva, where the European Medicines Agency auditors were based. I was sitting in our Boston headquarters conference room with our CEO, Marcus Henley, our CFO, Brian Walsh, and our head of European operations, Klaus Werner. On screen were 3 EMA auditors, Dr. Helena Kraft, the lead inspector, and her 2 technical specialists. They had spent the past 6 weeks reviewing our manufacturing processes, quality control protocols, and compliance documentation for our planned expansion into 6 European markets. Meditech Solutions manufactured advanced diagnostic equipment and pharmaceutical-grade reagents. Our U.S. operations were solid, well-established, profitable, but Marcus had spent 2 years planning a massive European expansion that would essentially double our company size. He'd secured $850 million in investor funding, signed preliminary partnership agreements with distributors in Germany, France, Italy, Spain, Belgium, and the Netherlands, and promised everyone that we'd be operational in Europe by Q2. Everything hinged on EMA approval, and EMA approval hinged on the compliance certification sitting in front of me. I was 39 years old, and I'd been in regulatory compliance long enough to know when documentation didn't match reality. The certification claimed our quality control processes met ISO 13485 standards and European Union regulatory requirements. But I knew for a fact that our Boston manufacturing facility had cut corners over the past 18 months to meet production targets. Validation testing that should have been done weekly was being done monthly. Calibration protocols that required independent verification were being self-certified. And worst of all, 3 batch failures in the past year had been documented as acceptable variances, instead of triggering the full investigation protocols required by international standards. None of this was life-threatening, at least not yet. But it was enough to fail an EMA audit if they dug deep enough. And the certification in front of me would be my personal attestation that everything met standards. My signature would make me legally liable for any misrepresentation. Dr. Kraft's voice came through clearly. "Ms. Torres, we've reviewed your quality management documentation. Before we proceed to final approval, we need your formal certification that all processes are currently compliant with the standards outlined in your application." Marcus leaned forward, his expression intense. "Amanda, go ahead." I looked at the document again. "Dr. Kraft, I have a few clarifications I'd like to make before certifying." Marcus's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Our baseline processes meet the standards outlined," I said carefully. "However, we've had some operational deviations over the past 18 months that should be disclosed in the interest of transparency." Klaus Werner, our European operations head, shot me a sharp look. Brian Walsh's face went pale. Dr. Kraft made a note. "What kind of deviations?" "Modifications to testing frequency and validation protocols that were implemented to accommodate increased production volume. Nothing that compromised product safety, but technically outside the parameters of our original certification." The auditors conferred quietly for a moment. Then Dr. Kraft spoke. "Ms. Torres, are Are you saying your current processes do not fully comply with the standards you've documented? I felt every eye in the room on me. I'm saying we need to provide additional documentation showing how we've managed those deviations and what corrective actions we've implemented. Marcus interrupted, his voice tight but controlled. Dr. Kraft, what Amanda is describing are minor procedural adjustments that are common in scaling operations. Our products meet all safety and efficacy standards. The certification she's been asked to sign confirms exactly that. The certification requests confirmation that processes, not just products, meet standards, Dr. Kraft replied. If there are known deviations, those should have been disclosed prior to this stage. The conference room went very quiet. Marcus turned to me, his smile forced. Amanda, can we take a 5-minute break? I'd like to clarify some internal details. Dr. Kraft agreed. The video paused. The moment the screen went dark, Marcus exploded. What the hell are you doing? My job, I said calmly. I can't certify something I know isn't accurate. You're torpedoing 2 years of work over technicalities. They're not technicalities. They're compliance requirements. If I sign that certification and they discover the deviations during follow-up inspections, we're looking at sanctions, fines, and possibly losing our European authorization entirely. Brian leaned in. Amanda, can't we just massage the language? Make it technically accurate but less alarming? No, because I'd still be attesting to full compliance when I know we're not in full compliance. Klaus threw up his hands. This is insane. We've invested $850 million. We have contracts. We have partners waiting. Then we should have maintained proper protocols, I said. This is exactly why compliance exists. Marcus stood up, pacing. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to go back on that call. You're going to sign the certification with appropriate caveats that we'll address in our corrective action plan, and we're going to get this approval. Understood? No. He stopped pacing. Excuse me? I'm not signing a false certification. If you want to proceed, you'll need to find another way. Marcus stared at me, and I watched his expression shift from anger to something colder. Then you're not the right person for this position. Effective immediately, you're terminated. Brian, get HR up here. Klaus, you're acting director of regulatory compliance. You'll sign the certification. My heart was pounding, but my voice stayed steady. Klaus isn't qualified. He doesn't have the regulatory credentials required by... I don't care, Marcus snapped. Security will escort you out. The call resumes in 3 minutes. I stood up slowly, gathering my phone and my bag. This is a mistake, Marcus. The only mistake was keeping you around this long. You've been a bottleneck for months. Now I've removed it. I walked out of the conference room, and within 20 minutes, I was being escorted out of the building by security, my access badge deactivated, my work email already shut down. In the parking garage, sitting in my car, I felt the adrenaline start to fade, replaced by shock and a strange sense of clarity. I'd just been fired for refusing to commit fraud. Marcus thought he'd won. He had no idea what I'd built into my contract 3 years ago, during a routine renewal negotiation that he hadn't paid attention to. A single clause that was about to become the most expensive oversight of his career. If you've ever been fired for doing the right thing, if you've ever walked out knowing you made the ethical choice even though it cost you everything, drop the word integrity in the comments. I want to hear from you. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Because what happens next is going to show you exactly why preparation and principle are the most powerful combination in business. I drove home in a daze, my mind replaying the conference call, Marcus's fury, the security escort. By the time I pulled into my apartment building in Cambridge, I had 17 missed calls and 23 text messages, most from colleagues expressing shock and sympathy. One message stood out, from Jennifer Park, our in-house counsel who had worked with me for 6 years. Amanda, call me when you can. Something you should know. I called her from my living room. She answered immediately. Amanda, I just heard what happened. I'm so sorry. Thanks, Jen. It was the right call, even if it cost me my job. That's actually why I'm calling. Do you remember your contract renewal 3 years ago? I frowned. Vaguely. Why? Because I was the one who drafted it, and you requested a very specific clause that I don't think Marcus ever actually read. Do you have a copy? I should. Hold on. I found my contract in my filing cabinet and pulled it up on my laptop. Got it. Look at Section 7, Paragraph 4, the Regulatory Authority Clause. I scrolled down, and my breath caught as I read the language I'd barely thought about since signing it. The Director of Regulatory Compliance shall maintain sole authority for all regulatory certifications, submissions, and attestations on behalf of Meditech Solutions in all jurisdictions. This authority is non-transferable and remains with the named individual regardless of employment status until December 31, 2026, or until voluntarily relinquished in writing by the named individual. Any certifications submitted without the express written approval of the named individual shall be considered unauthorized and may result in regulatory sanctions. I read it twice more. Jen, I barely remember negotiating this. You told me you wanted protection. You said you'd seen too many compliance directors get pressured to sign questionable documents. And you wanted contractual authority that couldn't be overridden. I thought it was brilliant, so I wrote it in language that made it legally binding. Marcus signed without reading the details. My mind was racing. So Klaus can't sign the EMA certification? Technically, he can sign it, but it won't be valid under the terms of your contract. And since the EMA application lists you specifically as the authorized compliance officer, they won't accept anyone else's signature without proper transfer documentation. How long does that take? For someone to get the equivalent credentials and regulatory standing you have? Years, Amanda. You have specialized certifications in pharmaceutical compliance, medical device regulations, and international standards. Klaus has an MBA and a law degree. He's not remotely qualified. I sat down slowly. So, the European expansion is frozen until you either voluntarily transfer your authority or the contract expires in 2026. And given that they have investor commitments, partnership agreements, and timeline obligations, every week of delay is costing them millions. I felt something shift inside me. Not quite satisfaction, not quite revenge. Something more like balance finally being restored. Jen, why are you telling me this? She was quiet for a moment. Because you've always done the right thing, even when it cost you. And I think this time, the right thing might actually reward you instead of punish you. But Amanda, don't call them. Don't reach out. Let them figure it out. Let them realize what they've done. And if they try to sue me, they won't. Because that contract was approved by their legal team and signed by their CEO. It's ironclad, and any lawsuit would only draw attention to why you were fired, which would bring regulatory scrutiny they absolutely cannot afford right now. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment as the afternoon sun moved across the floor, thinking about everything that had just shifted. Marcus had fired me thinking I was an obstacle. He'd just made me the only gate between his company and $850 million in expansion capital. And this time, I wasn't opening that gate until every rule changed. The first indication that Meditech had discovered the problem came on Wednesday, 3 days after my termination. My personal cell phone rang at 2 p.m. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. The message was from Richard Kim, a partner at Morrison & Drake, the external law firm Meditech used for major transactions. Ms. Torres, this is Richard Kim. I'm calling regarding an urgent contractual matter. Please return this call at your earliest convenience. I didn't call back. 20 minutes later, another voicemail, this time from Brian Walsh, the CFO. Amanda, it's Brian. Listen, we need to discuss something important about the European regulatory submissions. Can you call me back today? I deleted the message. By Thursday, the calls had escalated. Jennifer sent me a text. They're in full panic mode. Klaus tried to submit the EMA certification with his signature. EMA rejected it within 4 hours, citing that the application specifically designated you as the authorized compliance officer. Marcus is losing his mind. I replied, good. Friday afternoon, Marcus himself called. I watched his name appear on my screen and hit decline. He called again. Decline. Then a text. Amanda, we need to talk. This is bigger than what happened on Monday. Please call me. I didn't respond. Over the weekend, I received 8 more calls and a dozen text messages from various Meditech executives. I ignored all of them. On Monday morning, exactly 1 week after my termination, Jennifer called. Amanda, they want to meet with you. Marcus, Brian, the board chair, and their legal team. They're prepared to discuss reinstatement. I'm not interested in reinstatement. What are you interested in? I thought about that question for a long moment. About 11 years of being pressured to cut corners. About watching executives prioritize speed over safety, profits over protocols. About being fired for having a spine. I'll meet with them, I said. But not to negotiate my employment, to negotiate a consulting contract. And Jen, I want you there representing me. I work for Meditech. Not for this meeting, you don't. For this meeting, you work for me. I'll pay your hourly rate out of pocket. She was quiet, then laughed. You know what? I'm in. Let's do this. The meeting was scheduled for Wednesday at 10 a.m. at Morrison & Drake's offices in downtown Boston, neutral territory. I spent Tuesday preparing with Jennifer, outlining exactly what I wanted. This is aggressive, she said, reviewing my terms. They fired me for refusing to commit fraud, then realized they can't function without me. Aggressive is the minimum they deserve. Wednesday morning, I put on my best suit, the charcoal gray one I saved for presentations to regulators, and took an Uber to the law firm's offices. The conference room was full when I arrived. Marcus at the head of the table, looking like he hadn't slept in days. Brian next to him, Klaus across from them, Margaret Holloway, the board chair, Richard Kim and another lawyer from Morrison & Drake, and, surprisingly, 2 men I didn't recognize in expensive suits. Margaret stood when I entered. Ms. Torres, thank you for coming. These gentlemen are representing Vanguard Capital, our primary investor in the European expansion. The taller of the two nodded. Ms. Torres, I'm David Chen. We've invested $450 million in this expansion with the expectation of Q2 operational launch. We're now being told that timeline is in jeopardy due to regulatory certification issues. I sat down, Jennifer beside me. That's correct. Marcus leaned forward. Amanda, let's cut through the noise. You're angry about being terminated. I understand that. We made a hasty decision in a high-pressure moment. We're prepared to offer full reinstatement with back pay and a formal apology. I'm not interested in reinstatement. His expression tightened. Then what do you want? I slid a folder across the table. I want a consulting contract. Terms are outlined there. Richard Kim opened it, and I watched his eyebrows rise. He passed it to Marcus, whose face went red as he read. This is insane, Marcus said. You're asking for $4-5 million over 18 months? $250,000 per month for consulting services, plus performance bonuses tied to successful regulatory approvals. That's what my specialized expertise is worth on the open market. And these governance provisions, Brian said, reading. Veto authority over all compliance decisions, direct board reporting, immunity from termination except for cause with 3-month notice? Correct. You fired me once for doing my job properly. You won't get the chance to do it again. The Vanguard investor, David Chen, spoke up. Ms. Torres, our contracts with Meditech include penalty clauses for delays. Every week without EMA approval costs them $12 million in milestone payments, partnership penalties, and opportunity costs. We're now 3 weeks behind schedule. That's $36 million in losses and climbing. I met his eyes. Then I suggest Meditech accept my terms quickly. Marcus slammed his hand on the table. You're holding the company hostage. No, I said calmly. You created this situation when you fired me for refusing to sign fraudulent documents. The contract clause I negotiated was designed to prevent exactly this kind of pressure. You triggered it by terminating me. Now you're dealing with the consequences. Margaret, the board chair, had been quiet until now. Ms. Torres, I've reviewed the circumstances of your termination. I believe Marcus acted improperly, but these terms are substantially more than your previous compensation. My previous compensation was for being an employee who could be fired on a whim. This compensation is for being an independent consultant with the specialized authority you need, and can't get anywhere else. The value is in the leverage, not the labor. The second investor leaned in and whispered something to David Chen, who nodded. Ms. Torres, if we agree to these terms, how quickly can you unfreeze the EMA approval process? I can submit the proper corrective action plan and revised certification within 1 week. EMA approval would follow within 3 to 4 weeks if everything is in order. And is everything in order? I looked directly at Marcus. It will be, because this time there won't be any shortcuts, any corner cutting, or any pressure to certify something that doesn't meet standards. That's what the veto authority is for. The room was silent. Then David Chen spoke. Mr. Henley, I recommend you accept these terms. Every week of delay is costing us millions. Ms. Torres is offering a clear path forward. Marcus looked like he was chewing glass. This is extortion. This is consequence, I corrected. You wanted to remove an obstacle. You succeeded. Now you need to pay market rate to hire me back as the solution. That's how leverage works. Okay, we're at the final stretch. Everything is about to shift permanently. If you're loving this, if you need to see how this ends, make sure you're subscribed because what happens next is the perfect ending to this story. Let's finish this. The negotiation took 4 more hours. Marcus tried repeatedly to reduce the terms, to eliminate the veto authority, to shorten the contract. I didn't budge on a single point. Finally, at 2:47 p.m., Margaret Holloway made the call. We're accepting your terms, Ms. Torres. Richard, draft the agreement. I want it signed by end of business today. Marcus stood up and walked out of the conference room without a word. By 5 p.m., I had signed a consulting contract that gave me everything I'd demanded. $4. $5 million over 18 months. Veto authority over all compliance decisions. Direct board access. And most importantly, a clause specifying that no employee would face retaliation for refusing to sign questionable certifications. I spent the next week rebuilding the EMA submission properly. Full disclosure of the process deviations, comprehensive corrective action plan, independent verification of current compliance status, and a certification that I could sign with complete honesty. Dr. Kraft from the EMA personally called me. Ms. Torres, this revised submission is exactly what we needed. It demonstrates proper governance and accountability. We'll have final approval within 3 weeks. Thank you, Dr. Kraft. May I ask you something off the record? Of course. There was a week when we received a certification signed by someone named Klaus Werner. We rejected it because he wasn't the designated compliance officer. Then silence for 2 weeks. Then this comprehensive, honest revision from you. What happened? I smiled. Let's just say the company learned an important lesson about the value of regulatory integrity. The EMA approval came through on schedule. The European expansion launched successfully. Vanguard Capital made their projected returns. And Marcus Henley quietly resigned 6 months later after the board decided they needed new leadership direction. I wasn't sorry to see him go. My consulting contract evolved into a permanent position as Chief Compliance Officer, with terms that became the gold standard in the industry. Other companies started adding similar protective clauses to their compliance directors' contracts. Jennifer Park left Meditech and joined me as my deputy CCO. You know what the best part of this is? She said one day. What's that? You didn't just save yourself. You changed the whole system. Now compliance officers across the industry have leverage they never had before. They can't be pressured to sign off on dangerous shortcuts. I thought about that, about how one contract clause, negotiated almost as an afterthought, had become a weapon against exactly the kind of corporate pressure that destroys lives and companies. 3 years later, I was invited to speak at an international regulatory conference. The topic was Protecting Compliance Independence in Corporate Structures. During my presentation, I told the story of that audit call, the termination, the clause, the leverage, and what it taught me about preparation meeting opportunity. The lesson isn't about revenge, I told the audience. It's about building protective structures before you need them. It's about understanding that integrity has value, and sometimes that value needs to be contractually enforced. But most importantly, it's about knowing that doing the right thing might cost you in the short term, but if you've prepared properly, the long term belongs to you. The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes. After the conference, a young compliance officer approached me. "Ms. Torres, I'm being pressured to sign off on something I know isn't right. I'm afraid if I refuse, I'll lose my job. Do you have protective clauses in your contract?" "No, I didn't know that was something I could negotiate." I pulled out a business card. "Call my office. We'll help you draft language that protects your authority, because nobody should be fired for having a spine. And if they are, they should have the leverage to make that decision very, very expensive." She thanked me with tears in her eyes. That night, flying back to Boston, I thought about that audit call 3 years ago, about Marcus waving his hand dismissively, about security escorting me out, about sitting in my car wondering if I'd just destroyed my career. I hadn't destroyed it. I'd just stopped letting other people control it. They fired me after the audit call, thinking they'd removed an obstacle. The clause I'd negotiated years earlier froze their $850 million expansion overnight. And when they came back begging, I rewrote every rule that had failed me. Now I protect other people who refuse to compromise. Because that's what real compliance looks like. Not just following rules, building systems where the right thing is also the protected thing. So here's what I want to know. Have you ever been punished for doing the right thing? Have you ever been fired for having integrity? And if you could go back, what protective measures would you put in place? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your story. And if this showed you that preparation, principle, and leverage are the most powerful combination in business, subscribe to this channel. We're telling stories about people who didn't just survive being underestimated. They turned it into power. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching until the end. And remember, the best time to protect yourself is before you need protection. The second best time is right now. I'll see you in the next one.